The River's Edge.
Where the river knows and the wild winds call, through the dance of time beyond it all, two hearts found a place where silence flows in the gentle arms where the river knows.
It was the kind of morning you only notice when you've come through something, or are just about to. Mist hovered low, dancing in threads over the water, like secrets still deciding if they should rise or vanish. The river was calm, except for the occasional swirl where something unseen moved just beneath. Dew clung to every blade of grass, each one catching the early light and holding it like a promise not yet spoken. A crow called from the cedar's highest limb, not a warning, not a welcome, but a marking of time, like a page being turned. The sound echoed across the stillness, finding its way through the pine-heavy air to the ears of the man standing at the edge. River True stood barefoot, toes curling slightly into the cool mud, the cuff of his worn blue jeans kissed by the damp grass. He held a silver thermos in his hands, his father's, worn smooth at the handle. Coffee steamed up into his face, mingling with the river air. He didn't drink. Not yet. This was part of his morning ritual, watching the river wake. Behind him, the old cabin still slept, its wood dark with rain memories and moss-fed time. Inside, folded on a crooked chair, lay a letter that would never be sent. He'd written it a dozen times in his mind, sometimes in sorrow, sometimes in silence. The river seemed to answer before he could finish it. That's the thing about some truths. They ripple outward, even when they're never spoken. He took a step closer to the edge, letting the wind lift a strand of hair from beneath his cap, that well-worn Irish tweed one he always called his author hat. Somewhere out there, he imagined, someone might be listening. Or maybe, like him, they already knew. The coffee cup was empty now, set beside a folded cloth napkin, and a smooth stone he'd picked up from the water's edge a few years back. River sat on the porch rail, one boot resting on the lower beam, gazing past the reeds swaying in the breeze. The sun was higher now, casting golden dapples on the surface of the water, making it glint like rippled glass. He held the notebook in his hands, the one that hadn't seen ink in weeks, maybe months. Inside it were fragments, half-finished thoughts, lists of things he meant to fix, sketches of fish, birds, a dream he couldn't quite remember from late spring. And near the back, there was a page with just one line. Some truths don't need to be spoken to be heard. He read it again, slowly. That line had come to him in the dark one night. He remembered sitting up, scribbling it down, and feeling like someone else had whispered it into his mind. The wind shifted. A crow called out from the pines. River stood, walked down the porch steps, and onto the dock where he'd fed the fish earlier. They were gone now, retreated to deeper water. But he knew they'd return. They always did. And just then, as he looked out over the wide, still river, the story began to form again. Not just words, but feelings, images, a name. A memory that wasn't quite his, and yet felt like it belonged to him. Maybe it was time to write the letter after all. Or maybe the story would find its way on its own. She came with the morning mist, the way fog lifts off the river just before sunrise. River had seen her a few times before, down past the bend, beneath the old weeping willow that leaned like it was listening. She painted quietly, always barefoot in the grass, her long braid brushing the small of her back. He never got close, not out of fear, but because it felt like approaching a deer, moved too quickly, and the moment would vanish. She had a wide canvas, a sun-bleached smock, and a gentleness about her that was unmistakable, like the water knew her touch. The locals called her Healing Hands. No one really knew her name, but there were stories. Some said she'd come back to the river to mend a broken part of her heart. Others whispered She'd always lived nearby, tucked away on the far side of the ridge where the deer still crossed at dusk. This morning, something shifted. River stood on the dock, coffee in hand, when he saw her again. This time closer than ever. She was walking along the shoreline, her sandals in one hand, a small satchel in the other. The wind moved through her hair like it remembered her. She paused for a moment, then looked up, and this time their eyes met. She smiled, not a polite smile, not a distant, neighborly nod, something else. The river always had its rhythm. River had lived by it long enough to know its moods, when it would run low and glassy, when it would swell with rain, and when it would shimmer with that golden hush only found in early spring. But nothing prepared him for the shift that morning. She came down the bank, just like before, her silhouette outlined in morning mist. Only this time she wasn't painting. She was walking, straight toward him. The dock creaked softly beneath his boots as he stood there, heart in his throat, coffee forgotten. The sun caught the curve of her cheek as she approached, casting her in that same amber light the river reserved for its most honest mornings. Her eyes held a quiet strength like she carried her own weather, a soul shaped by both storms and stillness. When she reached the edge of the dock, she didn't speak at first, just looked out across the water like she belonged to it. Her voice, when it came, was as calm as the current. "I've seen you here before," she said, not turning her head. "You're the one who feeds the fish." River nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "They'd riot if I didn't." That made her laugh. Soft, real. It slipped into the morning like a warm wind. She stepped onto the dock beside him, slow and unafraid, her bare feet making no sound on the wood. Up close he noticed her hands, paint-stained, sun-browned, fingers long and gentle, like they'd held fragile things and let them go when needed. It was healing hands. He glanced at her canvas roll tucked under her arm. Taking a day off? She looked down, thoughtful. No, just looking for something different today. Maybe someone. Then her gaze met his. Time slowed. It wasn't fireworks or thunder. It was quieter than that, but no less powerful. Like the river had just changed course, and they both knew it. River didn't usually offer company. Solitude had been his companion for so long, it felt like an extension of himself. But there was something about her presence. The way she stood without filling the silence. The way she watched the river like it held answers she hadn't yet dared to ask. That felt right. "You want to walk a bit?" he asked, motioning toward the winding path that traced the edge of the water. She nodded. "I'd like that." They moved in rhythm with the earth, boots and bare feet, padding, soft, over pine needles, wild grass brushing at their legs. The breeze stirred the leaves above them, and somewhere nearby, a red-winged blackbird sang its morning hymn. River glanced sideways. "So what do I call you besides healing hands?" That earned another smile. "You heard that?" "Might have overheard it from your brushstrokes," he said, half serious. "They say a lot." She looked down, modest, but not shy. "Juna, short for Junaria, my grandmother's name." He tasted the name like a note on the wind. "It suits you." Juna ran a hand over a low-hanging branch, fingers catching the dew like it was something precious. "And you?" "What do I call the man the fish worship?" He chuckled. "River, just River." "That's not a nickname, is it?" "Nope." She paused, eyes narrowing playfully. "River, who lives by the river?" "Fitting, isn't it?" He grinned. They laughed together. The kind of laughter that doesn't feel like strangers, but like two old souls, meeting again after too long. Up ahead, the trees opened wide into a little cove where the river pooled slower. A weathered bench, half sunken into the earth, waited in the shade, like it remembered them from another life. They sat, side by side, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's warmth. Juna gazed at the ripples. Do you ever feel like the river brings things to us? Not just driftwood or feathers, but people, moments, lessons. River leaned back, arms resting on his knees. I've lived here long enough to know it never brings what you want when you want it, but it always brings what you need. She looked at him then. Something in her eyes flickered, recognition, or maybe hope. So, why do you think it brought us both here now? The question hung there, unspoken, but heard, like a stone skipping across the surface. River didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down and picked up a small stone from the riverbank. Smooth, flat, perfect. He handed it to her. Maybe you'll find out when you throw this in. Juna turned it over in her hand, felt its weight, and then, without a word, she tossed it gently across the water. Plunk. The ripples moved outward and carried something more than just water. The days passed like the wind, gentle, full of rhythm, not rushed. The river, ever patient, kept time like a drum only they could hear. Each morning, Juna would return, carrying her small easel and a weathered canvas bag filled with brushes, oils, and watercolors that smelled faintly of lavender and linseed. River would hear her light footsteps coming down the slope long before she appeared, and each time, something in him softened. She never knocked. There was no need. He had left the gate open. River had a small dock that jutted just far enough into the river to feel like a different world. It became her studio. She would sit cross-legged near the edge, dipping her brush into jars, head tilted in thought. The sound of water, birdsong, and the occasional flick of a fish breaking the surface surrounded her like a symphony. He didn't interrupt her. Not at first. Instead, he'd work nearby, hauling firewood, fixing the fence, cleaning the boats. But often, he found himself pausing to glance her way. Not to watch her paint, but to watch her. The way her shoulders relaxed when the sun hit them just right. The way her eyes narrowed at a stubborn color. The way her lips parted slightly when she was lost in thought. It was like watching someone pray. One day, she spoke without turning around. "You always stop working when you think I'm not looking." River, caught, gave a short laugh. "Guess I'm not as sneaky as I thought." "You're quieter than the wind." She dipped her brush again, dragging pale blue across the canvas. "But I feel you. The river tells me when you're near." He walked over, leaned slightly to one side. "What are you painting?" She hesitated, then stood up slowly, turning the canvas toward him. It wasn't the river, it wasn't the trees, it wasn't even her usual abstracts of spirit and mood. It was him, but not just his face, not a portrait. It was how he felt, carved in light and shadow, color and texture, his steadiness, his silences, the mystery and warmth woven into the same space. River stared, eyes catching the gold streaks at the edges, the way the colors blurred around the center, like time was folding in. He didn't speak right away. Finally, his voice low. "Is that what I look like to you?" Juna set the brush down, her hands on her smock. "No, that's what you feel like, to me." The river whispered against the dock. A heron flew low across the surface, its wings brushing the wind. River looked at her, eyes lingering. There was something rising in him, a tide maybe, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not the need to say something clever, not the need to say anything at all, just the sense that he'd been seen. Not for who he was pretending to be, but for who he really was. The days became a rhythm. Not everyone was spoken for, but enough were. Sometimes she'd arrive with a quiet knock on the wooden frame of his cabin door, holding a thermos of coffee and a small sketch pad. Other times, she'd already be waiting at the dock when he stepped outside. Sun on her shoulders, feet dangling above the water like a girl from another lifetime. They began to trade. She gave him sketches, quick lines of him mending the boat, slicing an apple, tossing crumbs to the fish. He gave her stories, pieces of himself stitched slowly into conversation, The time he nearly bought a ticket to South America and didn't. The place upriver where he carved his initials into a tree at 17. The sound the sky made during a storm when he thought the world was ending, and it didn't. Each tale came with silence, a space where they would just look at each other, not with the awkwardness of strangers unsure of what to say, but with the comfort of two people who didn't need to fill the air with noise. One evening, she stayed later than usual. The sun had long dipped behind the hills, and the river mirrored the last lavender glint of the sky. River gathered driftwood and a few dry branches from the lean-to. He built a fire just off the dock near the sandy edge, the way his father once showed him. Tight, centered, no wasted sparks. The flames licked upward, orange and gold, casting their own shadows. He brought out a small iron skillet and a bundle wrapped in wax paper. "You hungry?" Juna looked up, smiling. "If that's fish, I'll trade you one sunset painting for a plate." "Deal." He seasoned the fillets, lightly, let them sizzle over the fire, the scent drifting like a promise. They ate sitting on a worn blanket, legs crossed, a tin mug of something warm in her hands, the flames painting golden shapes across her face. Then, quiet again. But not the empty kind, the kind that's full of tension, of possibility, the kind you feel in your chest, like something is beginning to hum there. She spoke softly, not looking at him. "River, what made you stay here?" He didn't answer right away, then just as gently, "Same thing that keeps me now." A pause. She turned, her voice barely above the crackle of fire. "And what's that?" He looked at her, long and open. "I'm still figuring that out." A smile curled the edge of her mouth. Not surprise, not teasing, understanding. They sat that way as night deepened. The stars came out like old friends, and the river grew darker, more still, like it was listening too. When she finally stood to leave, she turned toward him at the path's edge. "You feel like a place I forgot I was looking for." And then she was gone, her scent still in the air, the warmth of her hand lingering in his memory. Back inside, later that night, River sat alone with the fire now embers. He opened his journal, the one she didn't know about yet, the one with maps of dreams folded between pages, drawings of birds, trees, hands. At the very back, a letter, unfinished, unsent. He touched the paper, but didn't write, not yet. It had been a strange kind of day, the air heavy with silence, the sky brooding, the birds gone still. Even the fish stayed deeper than usual, barely stirring the glassy surface. Juna had shown up anyway, a canvas tucked under one arm, raincoat folded in her other. "Thought I might catch the light before the storm rolls in," she said with a grin. River raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He admired that about her, how she could stand steady, even with thunder whispering on the horizon. By late afternoon, clouds had swallowed the sky whole, and the first drops fell, gentle, almost polite at first, a soft tapping on the roof of the river house, the kind that made you want to nap. But within an hour, everything changed. The wind picked up, fierce and twisting through the trees. Rain came sideways, slanting and wild. The river, once calm and thoughtful, began to surge. The banks swelled. Low brush disappeared beneath rising water. Logs rushed past, like forgotten stories. River moved fast, tying down loose lines, securing the door with extra latches. Juna helped without asking. Her hair soaked, her sleeves dripping, but her eyes sharp and steady. "I've never seen it like this," she murmured, watching through the small window. He nodded. "Only twice in my life. It doesn't last long, but it hits hard." Thunder cracked, a sound that shook the floor beneath their feet. Then the lights flickered, went out. They stood in the sudden dark, lit only by the flickering glow of the lantern River pulled from a hook. The golden light shimmered on the rain-slicked windows, on the curve of her cheek, on the line of his jaw. She turned to him, brushing soaked hair from her face. "You okay?" He hesitated, but then something cracked open inside of him. Not like lightning, but like warmth, like truth. "Yeah, now I am." She stepped a little closer. The storm outside roared, but inside the little house, it felt like time held its breath. Their eyes locked, and this time, neither of them looked away. He reached up slowly, brushing his fingers across her cheek, tucking a strand of wet hair behind her ear. She leaned into the touch without flinching, and in the hush that followed, they both stepped forward at once. Their lips met, gentle at first, almost unsure, then deeper, like they'd known each other in another life, like something ancient in their blood had waited for this exact moment. The kiss was fire against rain, warmth against wind. It was every unspoken word, every sidelong glance, every heartbeat shared in silence, now rising, overflowing, like the river itself. When they finally pulled back, her forehead rested against his. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The storm raged on, but the river house, and what lived inside it, held firm. The storm had passed sometime in the deepest hours of the night. Now, in the quiet, just before dawn, the world felt new. River stirred before the first light touched the windows. The scent of damp earth and rain hung in the air, mingling with the rich aroma of fresh brewed coffee. He filled the thermos and stepped softly, not wanting to wake her, but she was already up, curled in the old chair by the window, wrapped in one of his thick flannel shirts. She looked at him and smiled, soft and sleepy. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Me either," he replied, holding up the thermos. They stepped outside together, barefoot, the ground still wet beneath them, the air cool and clean. Light rain still fell in delicate streaks, but off in the distance, the sky was already breaking open, slivers of gold cutting through soft gray. Down at the dock, the river ran high and fast, its surface flecked with drifting limbs and scattered leaves. The fish weren't visible yet, hiding somewhere in the murky depths, but he knew they were there, waiting. He broke the bread like always. Small pieces, 3 or 4 at a time, tossed gently across the water. She followed suit, kneeling beside him, her laughter light as the bread vanished into the current. A blue heron stood across the bend, long and poised, waiting for a chance to strike. On the far side, red-winged blackbirds clung to reeds, bursting into song with the rising sun. And then they saw it. "River," Juna whispered, pointing toward the far edge of the dock. Half caught in the muddy driftwood, a bundle of river grass and moss was wrapped tightly around something. River stepped carefully to the edge, crouched, and pulled it free. The bundle was heavy and familiar. When he peeled it open, his breath caught. It was wood, smooth, pale, river-polished, carved faintly by time or maybe by hand. An old relic from the last flood. The same kind of wood he'd used to make the carving, the one he'd never shown her. He looked over at her, heart pounding in a different way now. "I found a piece just like this years ago, after the last big storm. That's when I started carving again." She reached out and ran her fingers along its ridges, her touch light but knowing. "Maybe this is your river's way of saying thank you." He nodded, struck by the weight of it. Not the wood itself, but the meaning, the timing, the presence. Then she smiled. "You know, we could carve this one together." He turned to her, surprised. "You'd want to?" She looked out over the rising sun, the sparkling river, the birds gliding low over the water. "Yeah, I think I already see what it wants to be." day after the storm felt like a hush, a kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of what had changed. Juna returned after lunch, canvas tucked under her arm, and River wasn't surprised. She didn't knock, just smiled when he looked up from the dock, his feet dangling over the water, a mug of something warm cupped in his hands. "I brought oranges," she said. They peeled and shared them slowly. The sun was warm again, but the air still carried the hush of the storm. The muddy banks steamed gently, and birds called across the water in their midday songs. After a while, River stood. "I want to show you something." They walked the worn trail upriver a little, past a line of reeds and a tangle of vines. He knelt near a place where the bank curved inward, a crescent cut by years of flood and drought. There, nestled among the sand and stones, were scattered pieces of driftwood, worn, gnarled, small, and strangely shaped. He picked one up, a slender piece with a crooked twist near the top. "When I was a boy, I called these sand spirits." He handed it to her gently, like it was something sacred. "I used to think the river made them for me. Left behind little shapes, like birds or deer, or sometimes even faraway places I hadn't seen yet." She studied it carefully. "They're beautiful. It's like the river carved them first." He smiled. "Exactly, like it was saying, 'Here, I see you.'" They spent the next hour collecting a few more. She found one that looked like a seahorse. He found one shaped like a crescent moon. Neither of them said much. The silence between them felt known. Later, back at the river house, he brought out the old journal. The leather cracked, pages worn soft with years. He opened to a page filled with rough sketches of carvings, fish, trees, one of a heron mid-flight. And then he turned a few more pages. There, in softer strokes, were figures. A man on the dock, a woman painting by the reeds. The river curled in shapes all around them, like it was watching. Juna looked up at him, eyes searching his. "You drew me?" River nodded, his voice low. "I think maybe I started drawing you before I met you." She didn't say anything for a while, just traced the lines of the sketch gently, like touching a truth. "And the carving? What do you think it is?" He looked toward the piece they'd pulled from the water. "I think it hasn't told us yet." In the quiet days that followed the storm, the river ran high but gentle, as though it were catching its breath. The mornings came slower now, not out of laziness, but reverence, the kind of hush that settles in when life begins to whisper its deeper truths. River brewed his coffee as usual, but now there were 2 mugs. One always had just the right amount of cream. Juna's. She'd begun visiting almost every day, her easel tucked under one arm, a canvas slung across her shoulder like a painter's shield. She painted close to the dock, where the light hit the water just right, and the sound of the ripples felt like music, brushing the edge of silence. And on the wooden rail beside her, a growing collection had begun. Little sand spirits, as River had once called them. Juna was drawn to them instantly, lifting each one like a found poem, reading its shape as though it carried a message only she could see. Some looked like dancing birds, others like curled leaves or flames frozen mid-twirl. One looked like a wave cresting over a heart. River watched her work, the way her hands moved with care and intention, as if honoring the gift from the river. She started painting one of the spirits, the heart wave, in layers of blues and golds, threading its shape into the background of the carving they were now slowly shaping together. The wood changed as they worked, knots revealing hidden grain that curled like laughter or leaned like lovers. Sometimes the carving seemed to shift on its own, not literally, but emotionally, a shape they'd both felt but hadn't yet named. And one morning, as the sun was just climbing above the cypress trees, Juna handed River a small bundle wrapped in canvas cloth. "For you," she said. her eyes full of something between a smile and a secret. Inside was a sand spirit she hadn't painted. She had gilded it, not with paint, but with a thin, winding ribbon of copper leaf, tracing the contours like veins of memory. On the back, carved into the wood, were the words, "Found in the current," held in the heart. River didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. The gift said it all. The evening arrived dressed in silver, clouds like feathers, moonlight pouring down the river like a hush that carried meaning. River had built a fire near the shore, just far enough from the dock for the warmth to reach them, but close enough that the reflection of the flames could dance alongside the moonlight in the water. Juna arrived carrying a canvas she hadn't shown him before, wrapped tightly in her old green jacket. She looked thoughtful, not distant, but deeper somehow, like she had spent the day walking through an inner forest, collecting moments. They shared dinner in easy laughter, grilled fish, a few roasted vegetables, and a bottle of white wine River had saved for when it felt right. Tonight it did. As the stars climbed higher, she unwrapped the canvas. "I wasn't going to bring this," she said, "but I kept thinking about it. Thought maybe it belonged here." The painting wasn't finished, but it didn't need to be. It was the river house. But, viewed from a dreamlike angle, tilted slightly like memory. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, and the dock shimmered in moonlight. But it was the foreground that took River's breath away. There were two figures, silhouetted and close. One stood holding a carved piece of driftwood, the other a brush in her hand. Between them, something unspoken passed, visible not as a line or word, but as a soft golden thread arcing from one heart to the other. River stared, silent for a moment. Then softly, "You saw it before it happened." Juna met his eyes. "I didn't mean to paint it that way. I just let it out. I didn't even notice until the thread appeared." She paused. "Do you think some part of us already knows where this is going?" He exhaled, slow and honest. "Maybe the river does. Or maybe we're just catching up to what's always been there." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of trust, of shared truth, and finally, of stories. Juna spoke first, her voice quieter than before. "I came here to heal. There was someone before. Someone who didn't see me. Not really. I stopped painting for a while. Felt like I couldn't find myself in the colors anymore." River nodded, eyes still on the canvas. "I used to write letters I never sent. One of them was to someone I thought I'd love forever." He looked at her then. "Turns out, some stories don't begin until the others are cleared away." The wind rustled gently through the trees like a whispered yes. Later, they returned to the carving, the unfinished shape they'd been coaxing from the wood for weeks. By the firelight, it was always beautiful, but under the moon, it glowed. Not literally, not with light, but with presence. And in that quiet moment, as River brushed his fingers across its surface, the shape they hadn't quite seen revealed itself clearly. Two hands reaching across water, joined not by force, but by choice. The morning came with the moon disappearing into the horizon. It felt like the river itself was breathing slower and fuller as the first light of day emerged. Mist hovered just above the water, a silver veil between the world of dreams and the waking day. River stood at the edge of the dock with a thermos in hand, already pouring 2 cups before he heard the soft steps behind him. Juna joined him, silent. Their eyes met only once. No words, just a quiet nod. The fish circled beneath them, darting like sparks in the water. River tossed a few torn pieces of bread in. "Morning, friends," he said softly. Juna leaned close to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They remembered." He smiled. "They always do." Just then, a ripple widened near the edge of the dock, and the small turtle emerged, lifting its head from the water and blinking at them. It paused a moment, like it was making sure they saw it, then paddled closer to the surface. River's face lit with that knowing glint. "I think that's my sign," he said. He reached into the carved wooden box that sat beside the bench, one she hadn't noticed before. From inside, he pulled out a delicate bundle of long-stemmed, wild lilies, their purple petals still glistening with dew. He'd wrapped them in simple twine, the kind she used to tie up her brushes. "I saw these blooming on the far side of the river," he said, holding them out to her. "Didn't even know they grew this close. I figured they must have bloomed just for today." Juna looked at them like they were the most honest thing she'd ever seen. "They say purple lilies mean the kind of love that grows slow," River added. "But once it blooms, it lasts." She touched the petals, then looked at him. The silence between them wasn't just unbroken, it was sacred. Later, they worked together side by side in the soft warmth of the morning sun, hands moving over the carving again. No words passed. They didn't need them. The birds sang along the shoreline, and the red-winged blackbirds called through the cypress branches like a quiet hymn. Each pass of the carving knife revealed something new in the wood, as if it had always known what it wanted to become. Juna paused once, resting her hand against its edge. I see it," she whispered. River looked. There, forming slowly in the curve of the driftwood, was the outline of 2 lilies blooming beside a small turtle, its head lifted like it was watching the sunrise. The heat of the day shimmered like glass above the river's surface. The current was slow now, meandering like it too was dreaming. River helped Juna into the old wooden kayak, steadying her hand as she stepped inside. The polished cedar hull creaked gently as it rocked beneath them, but the river held them steady. Side by side, they paddled, dipping in and out of shadows cast by overhanging cypress limbs. Neither of them rushed. The world was in no hurry, and neither were they. They came upon an old bridge, about halfway down the bend, its weathered beams leaning slightly, like it remembered better days. Vines had begun their slow claim across the wooden trusses, but the arch stood strong, timeless. "Want to stop here?" River asked. Juna's eyes had already locked onto it, a flicker of childhood wonder behind them. "It's perfect." They pulled the kayak up beneath the shade and stepped onto the mossy bank. There was a narrow ledge under the bridge where the beams were exposed, thick enough to sit on, wide enough to carve initials into. River pulled out his pocket knife. "You ever do this before?" he asked. "Nope," Juna smiled, "but I've seen it in stories." He nodded, opened the blade, and handed it to her. She paused, then carved their initials slowly into the wood. J plus R. "I'll finish it," River said. He added a heart beneath it, and next to that, a tiny carving of a paintbrush, crossed with a feather. "Brush and quill," he explained softly. "Our tools." The moment was silent, but not still. Without a word, Juna peeled off her outer shirt and took a running leap into the water. Her splash echoed beneath the bridge like a cannonball of joy. When she surfaced, her laughter was pure sunlight. "You coming in or what?" she called. River didn't hesitate. In a heartbeat, he dove in beside her. They swam under the beams, drifting together in the shaded pocket of cool water. The reflections played like ghosts across their skin. They floated on their backs, side by side, talking about childhood wishes, unspoken dreams, and the times they'd imagined someone beside them, just like this. As the sun reached its highest point, Juna swam back to the kayak, wringing out her hair. "You need to dry off," she said with a teasing grin. "I've got extra towels at the studio, and maybe some lemonade." He smiled. "Lead the way." The studio stood just up the gentle rise, nestled among willow trees that bowed like old poets, reciting sonnets to the wind. A wide porch wrapped around the small wooden house, painted in soft greens and blues that seemed to breathe with the river itself. Inside, the light was warm, filtered through thin, sheer curtains that danced like ghosts of the past. The air smelled faintly of lavender, turpentine, and citrus. And yes, fresh squeezed lemonade waited on the side table, the condensation dripping slowly down the glass like summer's own signature. Juna handed River a towel and one of the glasses. "Best way to dry off," she winked. They sat for a moment, sipping slowly, surrounded by brushes, canvases, and jars, filled with every shade of color imaginable. It wasn't chaotic, it was alive. The room pulsed with silent energy, as if the walls had seen every tear, every inspiration, every doubt she'd ever faced, and loved her anyway. Then she looked at him. Serious now, a softness behind her eyes. "There's one room I've never shown anyone," she said quietly. "Not even family." River simply nodded. No need to ask why. His heart knew already. She led him down a narrow hall, the floor creaking slightly beneath their wet footprints. At the end, a pale door stood closed. She hesitated for just a breath, then turned the knob and stepped inside. It was quiet in a way that didn't mean silence, but meaning. The room was lit by a single high window, angled so the light struck the largest canvas in the center of the room. A painting not finished, yet somehow whole. Swirling colors, bold and free, formed the outline of something not entirely human, and not entirely River. A spirit? A guide? A presence? All around the room were other paintings, each vivid and vulnerable. A child standing at the edge of water, casting bread to unseen fish. A pair of hands, cupping light. A lone figure, carving under a bridge. A feather caught mid-fall. A face only half turned, with eyes full of wonder, eyes that looked a lot like River's. "This is where I paint what I feel," she whispered. "Not what I see." River stepped slowly into the room, his breath caught between awe and reverence. He turned to her, voice low. "You painted all this before today?" She nodded. "I didn't know what it meant, not until now." He stepped closer, gently brushing his fingers across the edge of the half-finished canvas. "You were painting me before you even knew me." "No," she said, stepping beside him. "I was painting the part of me that was waiting for you." They stood in the golden hush of the studio, surrounded by the colors of unspoken truths, and something wordless settled between them. Not silence, not longing, but recognition. River stood motionless, eyes drifting across the room. The studio seemed to hum softly with the afterglow of their day. Laughter, swimming beneath sun-dappled water, a secret carving beneath the old bridge. Now, silence wrapped around them like a shared blanket. Juna stood to one side, watching him, her heart beating louder than she wished. Would he understand? Would he feel what she had poured into these paintings? The canvases were alive with river tones, deep greens and swirling blues, soft silvers catching light. But it was the smaller pieces that caught River's breath, studies of sand spirits, delicate outlines of driftwood creatures, lovingly painted with rich, imaginative color. She had painted them as she saw them, guardians, messengers, small emblems of nature's whimsy. River's fingers hovered near one canvas, a group of fish facing forward beneath clear water. They looked exactly like the moment he'd witnessed so many times and captured in his own journal. I don't know how you do this," he whispered. Juna smiled softly. "I've seen the way you are with them. They trust you. I felt it too. I wanted to honor that." River turned to her fully then, voice low and thick with meaning. "You're painting the river's voice. You're hearing it too." Her eyes shimmered, just for a moment. "I think maybe it called us both here." Silence. Not the kind that begged to be broken, the kind that said everything. After a long moment, River stepped closer to a small table near the window. Among scattered sketches and jars of brushes, a weathered box sat closed. Something about it pulled at him. Juna followed his gaze, then with a breath, opened it. Inside, small driftwood pieces lay nestled in linen, sand spirits. "I've started collecting them," she said softly. Each one felt meant. "I was going to show you when the time was right." River swallowed. His heart ached in the best way possible. "They're beautiful," he murmured. "I used to think they were left behind just for me, when I was younger." A smile tugged at Juna's lips. "Maybe they were. Maybe now, they're meant for both of us." Outside, the sun began to set, slanting gold across the river beyond the window. The room grew warm with that ancient light. And in that moment, no words needed to be spoken. Something deepened between them. Not new love, but old, like the current beneath the surface. The golden light of late afternoon had softened the edges of everything inside Juna's studio. Brushes stood poised in jars like tiny flags of hope. Paints shimmered with endless possibility, and on a central easel, Juna had begun her newest work, the fish beneath the water, facing forward, as if greeting a dear friend. On the nearby workbench, their unfinished driftwood carving rested, the piece that had slowly revealed itself beneath their shared hands and knives. It was becoming more than either of them had imagined, a flowing shape that seemed to embody both movement and stillness, as if the river itself had whispered its design to them. Juna stood back, her brush suspended mid-air. She glanced at River. "Would you like to help?" she asked, voice gentle, eyes shining. River blinked. "Paint?" A small smile tugged at her lips. "Of course, you see as deeply as I do. You draw in your journal, don't you? You feel the shapes of things." River hesitated. Something inside him stirred, a nervousness, but also a thrill. "I've never tried it like this," he admitted. Juna moved beside him, picked up a clean palette, and with quiet grace squeezed out hues of river green, soft violet, shimmering blue. She held out a brush. "Come here," she whispered. His fingers curled around the wooden handle, large and rough compared to her slender ones. She stepped behind him, arms gently sliding around his. Her hands covered his, warm, sure, guiding. "Just feel," she said softly. "Not the water, not the fish, but the space between. The way it moves, the way it knows." River's breath caught, her closeness, her voice. He was certain she could hear his heartbeat. Together they moved, the brush gliding in slow arcs, dappling in light, trailing in shadow. With every stroke, their bodies leaned closer. The air grew thick, shimmering with unspoken longing. Juna's cheek brushed lightly against his shoulder. Her fingers lingered over his. Their shared breath danced between them. At last they paused, the brush resting against the canvas, a new shape, shimmering to life among the fish, a soft curve echoing the driftwood carving's graceful lines. As if both works, wood and paint, had been waiting for this moment to converge. River turned his head slightly, their faces now inches apart. In his eyes, wonder. In hers, a tenderness so deep it nearly stole the air. "You're a natural," she whispered. His voice was a low murmur. "Only with the right teacher." And for a breathless second, the world held still, as if the river itself leaned in, waiting. Evening had gathered around the studio, velvet soft, folding the world into shades of indigo and gold. Through the wide windows, the river reflected the last streaks of twilight, shimmering like a living memory. Juna moved gracefully through her small kitchen, and the scent of herbs and fresh bread filling the air. River sat nearby, his gaze lingering on the painting they had touched together, and on the driftwood carving now glowing softly beneath a small lamp. He felt the warmth of the room, of her presence, and something deeper stirring beneath it all. Juna set down 2 plates on the table. "Nothing fancy," she smiled softly, "but it's yours, if you'll share it with me." River looked up. "I'd share anything with you." A flicker passed through her eyes, tender but touched with something unspoken. She sat across from him, folding her hands as if gathering her courage. For a long time, she began quietly. "This room, my work, was a sanctuary. I couldn't let anyone enter." River listened, sensing the weight beneath her words. "I painted from memories," she continued, voice soft as the dusk. "From loss, from longing. I lost someone once. I loved deeply, and when it was gone, I closed off this part of myself. The river kept me company, the fish, the turtles. They listened, but people I kept at a distance." She looked down, fingertips tracing the edge of her plate. "Until you," she whispered. River's breath caught. The truth rang clear through him, as if some ancient bell had been struck in his heart. "I don't know how," she said, lifting her gaze to his, eyes shimmering. "But the river brought you, and with you, this feeling I thought I'd lost forever." Silence wrapped them, not uncomfortable, but sacred. River reached across the table, his hand finding hers. "You haven't lost it," he said gently. "You were waiting, and so was I." The warmth between their palms spoke volumes. For a moment, no words were needed. Only the quiet hum of the river outside and the steady rhythm of 2 hearts finding each other. Later, as night deepened, River stood by the door. Juna walked with him to the edge of the dock, the moon silvering her hair. She smiled faintly. "Come back soon." He looked at her, truly looked. "I will," he promised. As he climbed into his kayak, Juna's silhouette remained framed against the lantern-lit studio, a vision he would carry with him. The paddle dipped silently into the water. Each stroke was measured, steady, the river's song a gentle companion beneath the stars. And as he drifted homeward, beneath the vast night sky, a quiet resolve filled him. Tonight, finally, he would finish the letter never written. The words had been there all along, waiting beneath the surface. Now, at last, they would rise. The moon hung low as River sat beneath its pale glow at his small desk near the window. The room was hushed, but alive with the pulse of the river beyond. Each gentle lap against the shore, a heartbeat of its own. Before him, a fresh page. His hand hesitated for only a breath, then moved, as though guided by unseen currents, and he began to write. "Juna, I never thought I'd write this letter. Perhaps that's why it took the river, and you, to show me how to begin. There are things the heart knows before the mind is ready to speak them. I've watched the river all my life, trying to understand its ways, its lessons. But it wasn't until you stood beside me on the dock, laughing beneath a rain-slick sky, or painting in the light of dawn, that I truly began to understand. Love flows the same way. Quiet, steady, patient, true. I've spent years feeding the fish and turtles, learning to listen to their small wisdom. They taught me that trust is built not in grand gestures, but in the gentle rhythm of presence. You have given me that gift without asking, without forcing a word. The day we paddled beneath the old bridge, when you laughed and dove beneath the surface, I saw a freedom in you that woke something in me, the part of me that had learned too well to guard my heart. But love is not meant to be kept behind walls. The river whispered that to me today, as it has in so many ways since you arrived. When you opened your studio to me, when you shared your hidden room, I knew this wasn't just friendship or fleeting connection. It was a truth waiting to be spoken. I do not offer you anything perfect or polished. I can only offer my heart, unguarded, grateful, deeply yours, and a dream for whatever future we might shape together. If the river wills it, if your heart whispers the same, I would choose to stand beside you in all tides to come. with all I am, River." River leaned back, breath caught in his chest. The words had found him as much as he had written them. Outside, an owl called into the night. A soft smile crossed his face. The river had spoken, and now so had he. The morning dawned soft and silver. The river still carried the weight of last night's dreams, its surface dappled by drifting leaves and soft ripples. River had been up before the first light, the letter folded neatly in his jacket pocket, as though it had been there forever, waiting for its moment. The kayak slipped through the water like a whispered secret. River paddled toward the small cove where Juna often painted in the early hours, warmed by her thermos of coffee and the rising sun. Today, the lilies seemed brighter, their purple blossoms open wide as though greeting him with quiet approval. She was there, seated cross-legged on the dock, brush in hand, a canvas before her. River paused a moment before pulling up alongside her, heart racing in ways the river's current could not explain. "Good morning," he called softly. She turned, her smile as familiar and new as each sunrise. "I was hoping you'd come," she said. "The river feels different today." River climbed onto the dock, sitting beside her. For a long moment they watched the water together in silence. Then, the weight of the letter pressed gently against his chest. The moment had come. I have something for you," he said, voice low. Juna glanced over, curiosity dancing in her eyes. Without a word, River reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter, now slightly worn at the fold from his fingers, nervously tracing it all morning. "For me?" she whispered. He nodded. "Something I should have written long ago, but it could only be written now." She accepted the letter reverently, fingers brushing his in a moment that sent a quiet tremor through both of them. Her gaze held his for a beat, longer than usual. Then, with breath held, she opened it. Time slowed. The river murmured, birds quieted. River watched her eyes move across each word, saw the small catches of breath, the slight tremble of her lips. When she reached the final line, "I would choose to stand beside you in all tides to come," she closed her eyes, pressing the letter gently to her heart. A tear traced her cheek as she looked back at him. "River, I don't have words. Only this." And without hesitation, she leaned forward, her forehead resting gently against his. They sat there, breath mingling, wrapped in a silence deeper than language, a communion of two hearts, now bared and bound. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "I was afraid to hope, but the river knew. It always knew." He smiled softly. "So did I. I just needed to listen." They sat entwined in the quiet morning, the river bearing witness. Above them, an owl called softly one last time as it returned to its hollow, the final echo of the night that had changed everything. The weeks became months. The river wore its changing moods with grace, mirror smooth beneath dawn skies, wild with song after summer rains, deep and slow in the heavy heat of July. Through it all, River and Juna moved in a rhythm, both new and ancient. Two currents joined by unseen hands. They painted together, carved side by side. Juna's paintings now held soft whispers of driftwood figures and the river's subtle magic. River had taken to sketching beside her, and under her gentle guidance, had added new life to the carving they had once begun, now fully alive with intertwined forms, a great heron and a rising wave, two shapes caught in eternal dance. Their days unfolded in shared silences and soft laughter. They fed the fish and watched the turtles, naming them like old friends. River taught Juna to paddle through hidden channels where cypress knees rose like forgotten spires. Juna taught River how to listen, not only with a heart, but through the colors she poured onto canvas. Yet through it all, a quiet knowing grew in River, a knowing he no longer wished to keep tucked inside. It was time. The sun rose gentle and golden on the day he had chosen. A wide curve of riverbank beneath the towering cypress trees had been cleared. Juna thought they were simply meeting for a morning paddle, but as her kayak glided near, she saw soft lanterns strung between branches, wildflowers gathered in driftwood vases, and a single table dressed in white linen near the water's edge. She stepped onto the bank, breath caught in her throat. "River, what is all this?" He smiled, heart full and steady now. "A place where I can ask you something I've known for a long time." From his pocket, he drew a small carved box, the same wood they had gathered that first morning after the storm. Inside, nestled on soft river grass, was a ring, a simple band inlaid with silver and a thin strand of driftwood, polished and warm. He knelt before her. "Juna," he said softly, "I have loved you through the changing tides of this river and through the seasons of your heart. I will love you through every day that comes. Will you spend this life with me?" Tears shimmered in her eyes. She reached for him, pulling him to his feet. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, my river, always." They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the river flowed eternal beneath the sky. Their ceremony was simple, as they wished it to be, a gathering beneath the cypress canopy. Only the river, the wildlife, and a few kindred souls stood witness. Juna wore a crown woven of lilies from the river's edge. River carved their initials side by side in an ancient tree that had stood for a century and would stand for many more. As the sun dipped low, herons passed overhead. The owl called once, a single echo drifting into twilight. The river sang beneath it all, not as a backdrop, but as a blessing. For it had known, long before they did, that love such as theirs was meant to find its way home, and so it did.
Under cypress shadow, soft and wide, we stood where secrets choose to hide. Barefoot whispers on the summer ground, in the silence only hearts made sound. Promises wrapped in the cypress breeze, hands held tight beneath ancient trees. The earth could spin, the stars could fall, but that vow would outlast it all. The grass was cool, the night was kind, our words were wild, our souls aligned. The moonlight danced upon your face, a